The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gonzalez, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chairman Pro Tem Powell, for being so forthright. I think your answers to Mr. McHenry's questions at the outset were incredibly helpful. I think it was probably the most direct that you've been with respect to how you're viewing interest rate policy heading into the March meeting, and I certainly appreciate that, and I suspect others do as well. So thank you for that transparency. I want to start on Ukraine, and I know this is Ukraine and Russia, and I know this is just evolving. My view, despite some of the, what I thought was a little bit flowery rhetoric last night from the president, is this is the beginning of a long-term conflict. This is not something that will be over in a matter of days, but months and perhaps years, as the Russians encircle Ukraine and our lack of response in many respects. I know you're a student of history and you're a student of monetary policy history. When you look at a world where this is a longer-term conflict, how do you view a longer-term military engagement in Europe impacting rate policy and balance sheet policy? And if you haven't begun that study yet, is that something that the Fed will endeavor in the coming weeks and months?
It's a really good question, and I would have to agree with you that this event does seem to be one that is a game changer and will be with us for a very long time. As I mentioned, we don't understand yet. There are events yet to come that we haven't seen, and we don't know what the real effect on the U.S. economy will be. We don't know whether those effects will be quite lasting or not. But it's something we're going to be thinking about a lot. It's exactly the things we'll be thinking about. Really too early to say, but it's not too early to try to imagine and assess.
Thank you, and I know my thoughts and prayers are with the Ukrainian people, as are many of my colleagues, all of my colleagues. I think we were unanimous in that. We hope for a successful outcome, though admittedly the days ahead appear to be quite choppy, and it's hard to see a positive outcome in the near term. I want to shift to another thing the President said last night around companies need to lower their costs, not their wages, and that's how we're going to fight inflation. That sounds wonderful. How do you magically sort of lower your costs as a company? Is that something? It sort of implied that it's corporate greed that's leading to inflation. I've read your comments. I think they're spot on with respect to the supply-demand dynamics. But is there a way for companies to just sort of unilaterally lower their costs that you're aware of?
First, I
know you didn't see the
never
speech.
comment on the president's comments at any time, and I won't do that now. I think my experience in the business world very much was that businesses are constantly managing their costs. That's a lot of what businesses do. They tend, and so it's an ongoing thing. But I didn't watch the speech, and I don't know the context, and I would never comment on anything the president says. So,
thank you. Shifting to my last question, there's been talk of whether cryptocurrencies represent a good vehicle for sanctions avoidance. I think you've rightly said that's maybe for the purview of Treasury, but generally speaking, a system that transactions occur on a public ledger that are auditable and reviewable by the entire world. Anybody in the world can go and check and monitor these things, and in a world where those same systems have transaction speed limits, essentially. Do you think in that world a public ledger is a good or sort of less good way to launder money or avoid sanctions?
I don't want to. I'm not an expert on sanctions, and so I'm reluctant to comment on that in the context of sanctions, just because it's not our field, I would say a public transaction, there's a balance you have to strike between privacy, which is very important, but also the ability of law enforcement to, and national security to track payments. And I think to the extent that cryptocurrencies are a means by which you can evade both law enforcement and national security concerns, then that's not something we should tolerate.
Thank you for, again, your transparency, and I yield back.